Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Jay Wilson. I'm a content creator at Datacrew, and today I'm going to teach you a little bit about Python coding, this intersection between vibe coding or like using AI to generate code for you, um, g- getting started with building functions that scrape or interact with Domo APIs, and honestly, kind of give you some insight into how I think about coding problems in terms of integrations between, let's say, an API and like a program or a little mini library that I'm developing for users. Um, Let me just show you the final output, and then you can decide like if this is something for you. So the gist of it is I have in Postman a series of um, requests, and I had this problem where I was like, okay, I've got Postman, I've got these requests. I would like to have magic that could just generate functions for me that I can call and use in Python, or maybe use as scaffolding to copy paste into, let's say, Code Engine if I was building a new library against a new set of endpoints. And kind of the annoying thing is like the functions all kind of have the same signature, they have the same handwriting, they should look the same, but getting something to auto generate, yes, to an extent we can use ChatGPT for some of these things, but to do it consistently, we still need to do some programming. And so our end result is I'm going to take this um, collection and turn it into an export folder where I have a export called get cards. This is just coming straight out of the collection. I haven't made any modifications. It declares or it receives an auth that has a base URL. It generates a URL for me. It destructures the auth headers onto headers and passes it into a requests function. And I have the start of a test function. Now it does not work. It still needs massaging, but guys, it is way too late. I've spent way too many hours on this. So I'm done. I'm done making changes. Git add dot git commit git push. Okay, it's in GitHub. I'll link the code. If you want to fix it with some PRs, please, by all means. But that's what I'm going to show you guys how to do. Um, so let me just get to it. I'm going to start by going over scraping APIs. Again, if you've seen this, if you've seen any of the videos on my tutorials on my channel, like I go through this every single time, but just to fly through it real quick, I'm going to right click here and I'm going to inspect network traffic here. And I'm just going to click on a button, and just by interacting with the website, we are going to um, send a bunch of requests. This is great. But going through these one by one and saying, oh, let me find the right request. And what is this, lineage? I'm hitting the lineage API. Like going through these one by one and then copy pasting these by hand, there must be a smarter way to say, hey, if I interact with everything in Domo I'm interested in, could I generate 50 functions all at once? And the first step to that is to use what's called Postman Interceptor, which is a Chrome extension, but I think you can get it for like all of the browsers. It's an extension that will basically do the job of monitoring network traffic and just collate all of these into one place. And that place, of course, is Postman. So there are some setup instructions. Just Google it. But here I'm going to come in and I'm going to start my capture. So as soon as I interact with the user interface, like maybe I want to find a data set with a schema. Here's one that has XYZ number of rows. And maybe I'll go to the data tab. Maybe I will look at the schema tag. This is real work that I need to get done sometime soon. I can look at AI readiness. Maybe I will create a dictionary. Add all columns to the dictionary. Save. Great. I've AI enabled. I don't even know what that means. I've interacted with the interface. If I look here under Postman Interceptor, I can see it's intercepted a put request, a put request, a get request. It's intercepted a ton of requests. And these requests are what I need to turn into functions so that I can write functions to, I don't know, enable AI dictionary on all of my data sets. Or maybe I need to write a function that automatically changes everyone to a privileged user. So let's see, how could I do that? I could go into the user interface. How do I get a list of users? Well, just interact with the interface and have interceptor intercept the interaction. So, oh no, this user interface, I'm not loving this. That was 2 clicks and they were both wrong. How do I get users? Get out. It's late. Jay, calm down. Admin. Okay, great. All right, so here I found a list of all of my users. Let me find my friend Justin. Dear Justin, you were very kind and gave me a really nice shout out at Domo Palooza, so I thought I would update your alternate email to Justin is the best dev. Yep. So I'm going to interact with the user, maybe change their privileges, whatever the button click will be. Okay, I've updated a user. Is that captured as a patch? Is that captured in Domo? I assume so. Okay, so I have these interactions. Let me just do one more for good measure. I'm going to go to Code Engine. Yes, see what's happening here. I've got my friend Mr. Leonard doing some stuff. Let's see what Elliot's getting up to. He's writing JavaScript. And what's going on in JavaScript? He says update grid lines, passing in a data flow ID in the grid line variant. He's sending a get request to get the data flow definition, and he's sending a put request. This looks very familiar. Anyway, the point is we've now got, I don't know how many interactions with Domo's user interface that are now captured as requests. When I stop my capture, it's going to take me over to Postman. Postman says, hey, I've got all of these requests. Let me delete this real quick. Postman says, hey, I've got all of these requests. I'm going to save them in a new repository called, a new collection called Demo. And I'm going to organize them by endpoints. Cool. Now, on my YouTube channel, I do have a video about parameterizing. What are these? Parameterizing requests, so I don't actually have to save the actual base URL, and I can make it a little bit. I can make the next step a little bit easier. But let's assume we're just we're not even doing Domo. Let's assume we're doing any website. It doesn't really matter as long as it allows you to capture network traffic. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and export the JSON definition of this collection. And that's going to get saved here under Data Crew under Demo Postman Collection. Let me go ahead and replace it. I really don't care. All right. Again, just to prove that it works, I'm going to run my implementation. So the implementation file says this is the file that I want to work with, and just to make sure that I'm, not crazy, where is that file? Let me collapse this. I'm trying not to scroll too much. Sorry, guys. Here, somewhere I think we sent a patch request to users. Yep, we sent a patch request. This was the URL. We updated Justin. Did I send a body? I guess I just send a patch request. Okay. What I want you to walk away with though is like this JSON file is functionally the same thing as interacting with an API. And I want to pause for a moment to help you think through or understand how I think about writing integrations between two different APIs or like two different processes. Because it's super easy to throw around the word integration. And frankly, I don't consider myself a real developer, but here's kind of how I think about it. So if I have an API like Postman or Domo, I guess Domo really would have been the one, but I'm interacting with Domo, but the data is coming from Postman, right? It's coming from a Postman collection. I will use some sort of modeling to create consistency around what I'm expecting from the API. What I mean by that is like, think about Domo. Domo likes to call users users, but sometimes they're called persons. Um, and I can have a data set, but sometimes it's a data source. And sometimes they talk about streams. And not all data sets have a stream. Is that true? That might not be true. My point though is to say my first step when I have an API is to understand how it works, is to like say, hey, I've got this thing, build a model for understanding what an item is. And I can see here in this collection, I have info, but I also have a list of items, and each item has these properties, and this request object has these properties, right? So it's a whole nested set of, well, they could be classes. And a class is just like a dictionary where I know the attributes up front. And I'll be completely honest, I did not write this myself. Let me open chat. Let me start a new chat and do an ask. And I might say, and this is actually how I did it. Generate a series of Python classes for modeling this JSON. And you can do this with any API that has sent you JSON. You can say, hey, help me understand or give me a way of modeling what I'm getting back from the API. Are we doing it? ChatGPT is like, nope, not today, we're done. You can't be done. I'm giving a demo. Please do not make me start this recording again. All right, hold on. We're going to open up VS Code. Is it too much context? Okay, fine. There we go. Okay, you just didn't like the really long JSON string. That's probably fair. So what it's going to do is it's going to scan this really long document, and arguably I could have like cut out half of these items. I didn't need to send the whole thing, but it's going to say, hey, what assumptions can I make about each item in this list of items? Hey, what is a header? And yep, I'm going to, oh, it's still generating. Keep on going. Okay. So it's generated this class, and that's all well and good. I'm going to keep the simple one for now, just so we don't get ourselves overwhelmed. Let me make a new document, and let's look at this a little bit more closely. So it says, hey, I've got an info. Let me just save this so I can do some work on this. Let me call this delete me, delegate me. Okay, so the info data class has the fields postman, name, schema, exporters, la la la, and that lines up one for one with this first bit here. I now have header, I have URL query, URL, request body. I have an item. Instead of item, refactor this as postman request. Because I know that the item class is in fact a postman request, or it represents a postman request. And did you generate the whole no, you just made some of the changes. Okay, I see what you did. So I think I just replaced this chunk here. And so now my postman collection consists of the info and the list of postman requests. And each postman request consists of a list of responses. Let's see if that's true. Here is the item. So this is one postman request. It has a name, it has a request, and it consists of a list of responses. And that makes sense because you can save sample responses to a postman collection or to a postman request, and that's what would be here if I actually had any. Does it say it's optional? Field default factory is list. So it's saying this is an optional field. It's not always populated. Very useful. So again, a class or modeling in this context allows me to say, hey, this is what I'm expecting from the API. These are the properties, so I always know exactly how the properties are going to be shaped. I could even add some methods to say, hey, the text of name should all be uppercase or lowercase, or I can make changes using methods. All right, let's come back to my notes for a moment. So again, when I'm thinking about coding, I'll use modeling and data classes in particular, or if you're into Pydantic, like Pydantic's great too, I'll use modeling to say these are this is the shape of the class that I'm expecting from the API. And because I use classes on a go forward basis, I know for sure how, I can expect there will always be a value, or sometimes it's optional, or it's a list of strings, it's a list of dictionaries, what have you. So that's step one, is to model the API. The next step is to actually do your implementation. So in my case, I wanted to create a function or a series of functions that would convert a postman collection into a series of files. And I showed that earlier, but one more time, right? I have a file called where was get users. I want to get a list of users from Domo. And earlier we interacted with the Domo user interface. Presumably it sniffed, it caught this API, and now how do I send a GET request? More importantly, like, how do I convert? Let me see if I can find this. Go to my collection. There it is. All right, here's my request, my Python request class. It says it receives users. Oh no, this is get by an individual user. That's not the right one. There must be another one. No, I guess this is the one. This one will get users, I assume by ID. Here are the headers this is the method, a get method. These are the headers that we need to pass. This, does it have a body? No, it doesn't have a body. Does it have some query parameters? Okay, it has query parameters. How do I convert this into a function? Now, like, if I look at it through visual inspection, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see this goes there, that goes there. I get that. Ooh, this isn't quite done because this is passing the parameter. ID is this. If I were actually implementing this, I would have done this as get by ID. I would say, oh yeah, you're going to pass in the user ID of type string, and then I might extend this user ID. And then I'm no longer passing this as a parameter. I would delete this. Okay. My automation is by no means perfect. It gets a lot of stuff done. If I wanted to wrench on this some more, I could probably make it better. But the question still stands. How do we go from like this JSON object into a file, getUsers.py? And how does it know to pass a get method? And how does it know that Jay Wilson loves this debug API, which is a debugging tool that he likes to pass into all of his libraries? How does Domo know that? Again, we're going to split up modeling the API from the integration or the actual like implementation of this conversion function. So let's take a look at converter. Converter is going to have a lot of similarities to models because, again, models will have a it'll have a class called Postman request. Where are you? It'll have a class called Postman request. It's going to ignore, like we're ignoring Postman response, but Postman request exists. But then in my converter, I have a function called Postman request converter. And you're like, well, Jay, those are two similar names. Well, one is for modeling the API. The second is for saying, hey, I got this data from the API. I got this data from Postman. And now I want to convert it into a file. So that's what that is. And the way this class works is it says, hey, I'm going to use Postman request as a starting point. I'm going to use composition, I believe it's called. And in order to have this conversion, I need a couple pieces of information. I need to know the URL. I need to know the name of the function. I need to know the parameters it accepts. And I need to know the headers. And you might say, Jay, you didn't need to write a whole new function for this. You could have just gone with this model class. Yes, but no. If you'll notice, getUsers only passes accept, and it only it doesn't even, it only passes the accept header. And if I look at the original, there's a ton more headers as mobile, X requested with this stuff. But the thing is none of these headers are actually necessary for interacting with this API. This is just stuff provided by the browser. I don't actually need that to query this API. And you might say, well, Jay, that's obvious. That stuff is obviously generated by the browser. But when you're converting your code from JSON into something usable, there's no such thing as obvious. You actually have to write that code in. And that's why I have a separate class for handling converting data from the API into something useful. Let's take a look at headers. So I have a method. I have a method of Postman request converter called generate headers. Let's see how that works. Generate headers is a method. A method is just a function associated with a specific class. So for example, let me go back to delete me, and I'm actually going to delete it. If I had a, let's say, day equals Saturday, and I called day.lower. Lower is a method of the string class, and you know the outcome of this will be to convert Saturday into lowercase. This is a method of the string class. Just like string.upper is also a method, and you know exactly what that does. So, where was I? In my converter, I have a method called generate headers. Where's delete me? I have a method called day.generate headers. This obviously does not exist for the string class. You have no idea what that would do, but let me tell you what generate headers does for my conversion class. What it does is it receives an argument called required headers, which is a list of strings, and it basically says self.headers is equal to all of the headers from the original request. But take the key and make it lowercase. Because Domo's APIs don't always have capital accept, lowercase accept, capital contains, lowercase contains, right? But for headers, they can all, they're case insensitive. So I'll just make it all, force it to be lowercase. And if you pass a list of strings into my required headers, I could say, oh yeah, I'm only interested if the key value is in required headers. Now this is how you can tell I have generated code here, because Jay Wilson does not write code like this. This is not my usual handwriting. I would actually usually spell things out. Because I think K and V is hard to read if you're a novice coder. And then H, instead of calling it H, I would call this like required header. Okay, I think this is a little bit more legible. So if you have required headers, then self.header is equal to key and value for key and value in self.headers.item if the key is in required headers. Now, if I knew that whoever was passing in required headers always passed in required headers in lowercase, if I were a little bit lazier, I personally might have rewritten this like so, and it would have worked half of the time. And then eventually I would be like, why isn't it working? And that, again, that's one of the nice things about AI is AI's like, hey, you pass in a string, you should probably test for lower. But AI will also take these shortcuts like K and V, which again, it's not bad. It's just like, for me, this is stuff that I would tune up and make better if I were like putting this onto the internet. Okay. In any event, this is a method called generate headers. And now you understand that it will either just make self.headers equal to all of the headers, or it will filter them if you pass in required headers to this argument. But what's really important to understand here is we totally took for granted that I know a Postman collection request will always have an attribute called header. I took that for granted. But I know that's true because in .models, I said Postman request has a attribute called header. That header is a list of Postman request header. And Postman request header is always going to be it looks like a dictionary, but it's always going to be a key and value, and arguably, actually, from the API, it will always store the key in lowercase. Like, I just know that because it's built into the definition of the model. And again, that's one of the nice things about taking your API response, convert it into a model like a data class first, and then you don't have to guess what this shape is. Okay, anyway, that's how I generate headers for my conversion process. I do the same thing for generating URLs. I do a similar thing for generating parameters. I'll just do one more example. How do I get the name of my function? Here, as I look at the name of my functions, I'm like, oh yeah, it's obvious. It's the method and then whatever the endpoint was. So in get federated, Vertica federated, it is get method, and then whatever the last thing is here, that's going to be the name of my function. You know what? I want those switched. I want the name of the function to be... Am I going to break everything right now? I want it to be the endpoint first and then the method. Oh, Jay, you're going to break everything. All right, let's take a look at generate function name. Generate function name says, hey, pass in a... So this is a static method. Let me talk about that for a moment. A static method is a method associated with a class that does not require you to have an instance of the class. I don't have to have a class set up in order to call it. Let me think, how can I explain this? Generate function name could have just sat outside of the class definition and just sat on its own, because all I need to generate a function name is a URL and a method. Those are the only two pieces of information that I need. And that's contrasted from what we just looked at, which was, wasn't it generate params? When we looked at, no, it was generate headers. When we looked at generate headers, in order to know all of the pieces of information, we need a couple things. We need to know the required headers, which we're passing in as an argument. But if I don't pass it in as an argument, I'm saying read that in from self. And self is an instance of the class. Here's a way of explaining it. Let's say I have day equals Saturday, and then I say day dot lower. You know the outcome is going to be lowercase Saturday because lower is a method that we're calling on an instance of a string. I'm calling it on Saturday, so I know the result is going to be lowercase Saturday. But if I just said, oh yeah, string.lower, I can't call lower on string because I haven't created an instance of the string class. So I cannot call this method. Where were we? And so generate headers, again, I cannot call an instance of generate headers until I have all of the information about a request. Like, what are the headers? In order to create the filtered list of headers. Now, in the example of generate function name, all I need is a URL and a method, and I'm going to put it together. I said I was going to switch the order. As endpoint and method.lower. The only two pieces of information I need are the method and the URL. From the URL, I can split it, the string on the backslash, and then I can take the last one. That's all I need. So there's no self. I don't need to have an instance of the class to generate a function name. And the reason why I have that is because I have a static method called generate function name, and then I have the method, just a normal method called generate function name, and this needs an instance of self. So here, in order to generate the function name with self, I'm going to grab the URL from the request.url, which is associated with this instance of a request. I do similar activity, but this time I'm going to update self.function name with this value. You know, what I could also do is I can call self.generate function name, and I can pass in URL is equal to self.request.url, and method is equal to self.request.method.lower. Is that true? I forgot a comma. That is true. And is self.request.url the actual string? Let's go take a quick look. Oh, Jay. Modifying your code on the go, huh? Big moves. Self.request. Where is URL? .raw. Okay, that gives me my URL string, and I hope that's right. I'd be really sad if I mess things up. And then I think I can get rid of this and this. Okay, I'm sorry. I got lost on a tangent. So what we were looking at is the fact that with Postman request converter, with this class, I can now say, what is my implementation? How does Jay Wilson want my library to work as it interacts with this data that came from the API that has been forced into a known shape through modeling? At the end of the day, what I really want to do is I don't care about, these are necessary steps, generate the header, generate the URL, and so on. But the part of interest is this export function. The export function says, hey, let's turn this into a string. And so I know somewhere in here I'm going to have my write function, write it to disk. But what am I going to write to disk? Well, I know that I always have to import some base classes or some base modules that I need to do or need to have, and then I need to have this code. The code is my function, my class translated into a string, which is this. Okay, this is called a signature. These are some parameters that I need to pass in. Auth and debug API are always going to be passed in. How do I know the response? Well, all of my functions will be of type return request.response. And then how do I generate this stuff here? We're almost there. Let's take a quick look. As I look through build request code, I'm looking for this signature. All right, let's just start here. So the signature says my string is define get the function name, and we just talked through how we generate the function name. Great. Once I generate the function name, I always have to pass auth. I always have to pass debug API. I know that I'm going to return request.response. But how do I generate parameters? Well, if I have self.parameters, we know we will, and if I have the default parameters, then I want default parameters added to my signature. And so in the case of something like get providers. Get providers does not have any default parameters. Does get users? Do I have a get users? Get users does not. What about a post? Man, do any of these have any parameters? Here. So here, get cards receives a default parameter of parts. And then it's going to pass parts into this is not constructed properly. Oh, here. Into parts. Great. So how did we handle that? If there are default parameters, add it to a list as a string. Parameter of type string is equal to self-params dot value. The value from self-params. So this is basically constructing a default parameter argument up here, and then we're adding it to our signature. Sorry. Shoot, where are we? We're adding join args, we're adding parameter arguments to our signature, separating this list or joining this list as a comma delimited list, which of course we have to do if we have multiple parameters. We add our debug API, and that's the end of my signature. Cool. The next bit here is it generates a document string. And the nice thing is like document strings always have the same shape. They always start with args colon. What was the parameter? What was the value of the parameter? I know I will pass in auth. I know I'll pass in debug API. These will always have the same shape. So we're just appending this. We're adding this to a list of code strings. We do some more stuff. And then way down at the end, let's take a look at generating the request. So here I'm saying, hey, I know that my code needs to have a line where I say response is equal to request, where I pass in the method. What's my method? The method comes from the request class, method.lower. Great. And then I pass in stuff that I know I always have to pass. So I always have to pass URL, headers, parameters. If I have data in the body, I have to pass that as well. The outcome of this all is I say, hey, I've got code. Code is now a list of each line of code in my function. And now all I have to do is join it with the /n like new line command. I do that for generating my main function. I also do that to generate my test code. So it's the same thing again, right? What's my function name? How do I call it? And then I write that to disk. That's most of it, kind of in a nutshell. The last piece to like kind of tie this all together is I know how to convert one response. Collection converter converts a list of responses. So a list of Postman request converters. So I have a class method. A class method creates an instance of the class. So it says, hey, if you pass in the path, the path to the JSON object, I will generate my Postman collection, right? Which was the API implementation in its structured form. That's your collection. And then I'll pass that collection into the instance of the converter class. That's this guy right here. Arguably, I cannot have an instance of converter without the collection, so let me not make this an optional argument. I also need to know the export folder. Where is it going to? I will generate a list of converters for each request in the collection. That happens down here. Generate conversion files. That's a silly name. But generate a list of Postman converter files. And so here I'm calling the, where is it? Here I'm calling the class method to create a converter from a Postman request, right? Because again, the Postman request is the base. I know how that's shaped, but I have to add a little bit of extra stuff in order to have the converter that I want. Things like, what are my required headers? Are there any customizations that I want to add in? I'm not going to get through that code because this video is getting pretty long, but the outcome is I will have a list of converters, and as part of that, when I call my generate from Postman collection, it will also handle upserting the folder and generating my conversion files, hopefully. So at the end of this long rainbow, hopefully I didn't break anything that did not need breaking. We upsert our folder. Hopefully it's going to rename all of our files, putting the method at the end. I also have a function that calls the test, and it says, when I call the test, did I get a 200 response or not? All of my put functions, oh, that one actually worked. That's wild. I did not expect that to work. What about a post? Didn't call post. Still getting through them. Providers.get. Oh, didn't finish that one. Still going. Okay, that one threw a 400 error. So I would have to figure out, okay, why did this break? But again, my goal isn't to have this be a finished work of art. I would take this and copy this into Domo library or wherever I'm actually using it. Maybe Elliot's creating code engine function and he's like, hey, Jay, can you give me a bunch of API requests or like converted functions that I can use as a starting point? Yeah, we can. Okay, let me wrap this up. We covered a lot. We covered scraping websites by monitoring network traffic using Postman. That was this guy here, and the trick that made it all possible was this add-on Postman Interceptor, which is a really powerful tool for capturing like all of the API requests that go through your browser. We then said, hey, okay, we have this collection, let's export it as a JSON object. And then we said, hey, once you export it, use ChatGPT to model the results of this API and just produce a bunch of data classes. That way, when you take your data classes and you read them in, you know the shape. You have your consistency. Then you build a second set of classes, and it just so happened that my request converter class lined up one for one with a class out of models. That's not always the case. I could have been sending this to Jira. My converter class would have been totally different if I needed to interact with Jira. Or maybe I need to send stuff to Elation. I'm not trying to output a file. I'm trying to send stuff to Elation. My converter could have a totally different shape. But I want to separate understanding what I got from my API as something that I can recycle versus the integration or the implementation that's going someplace specific. And then because Jay Wilson has opinions about, oh, I want my files named a certain way, or this is a mandatory field versus not, my implementation might be one step removed from the converter. I know I didn't go through this, but here we are. The collection there's one collection. Each collection has many Postman request objects. Those Postman request objects get converted in the conversion phase to Postman request converters, and each of these can generate the Python function string, which we then write to disk. That's what we went over. If you stayed through this video, you're amazing. Have a great evening. I'll catch you guys later.